The rusted gate creaked as Marcus Chen pushed through to the farmland that once fed his family for 3 generations. 20 years in corporate finance had softened his hands, but the Missouri soil still recognized his footsteps. He'd returned to sell the property and finally close this chapter of his life. But the perfectly manicured rows of crops stopped him cold. Someone had been farming his land, farming it with precision that would make his grandfather weep with pride. But Marcus had inherited an empty, drought-ravaged wasteland. The bank statements proved no one had paid taxes or maintenance in 2 decades. Yet here stood acres of thriving corn, vegetables he'd never seen before, and equipment that belonged in a science laboratory, not a family farm. When he spotted the unmarked black vehicles parked behind the old barn and men in hazmat suits collecting soil samples, Marcus realized his childhood home harbored secrets worth killing for. The government clearly knew something about his family's land that he didn't. What had his father really been growing here, and why were federal agents harvesting it now? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus ducked behind the weathered fence post, his heart hammering against his ribs. 3 men in white protective suits moved methodically through what should have been his father's old vegetable garden. Their movements were deliberate, clinical, as they extracted soil samples and sealed them in metallic containers that gleamed unnaturally in the afternoon sun. The corn towered above him, easily 9 feet tall with ears that seemed too perfect, too uniform. He'd grown up here, spent countless summers following his father through these same fields, but nothing looked familiar. The plants possessed an almost luminescent quality, their leaves catching light in ways that defied explanation. A radio crackled from somewhere near the vehicles. Sample batch 7 complete. Readings are consistent with previous extractions. The voice was cold, professional. No sign of civilian interference. Marcus pressed closer to the fence, splinters digging into his palms. Civilian interference? This was his property. He had the deed in his briefcase, sitting in his rental car a quarter-mile down the access road, where he'd parked to avoid detection. One of the suited figures approached a section of the garden where enormous purple vegetables grew in perfect geometric patterns. Marcus had never seen anything like them, bulbous, almost pulsing, with veins of silver running through their translucent skin. The man cut into one with a specialized tool, and a faint blue mist escaped before being captured in a glass tube. The childhood memories came flooding back unbidden. His father's late-night trips to the barn with unmarked packages, the visitors who came only after dark, speaking in hushed tones with his parents in the kitchen, while Marcus was supposedly asleep. His mother's nervous habit of checking the windows whenever strangers drove down their rural road. "We're dealing with Generation 4 now," another voice called out. "The mutations are accelerating." Mutations. The word sent ice through Marcus's veins. He remembered the summer he turned 12, when his father had forbidden him from entering the south field. "Some things aren't ready for harvest yet, son," he'd said, but there had been fear in his eyes. That same summer, men in dark suits had visited 3 times. After their final visit, his father had burned everything in the south field and told Marcus they were moving to the city. They'd left within a week, abandoning 3 generations of farming heritage. His father claimed the drought had ruined them, that the land was worthless now. Marcus had believed him, even when his father refused to sell the property, insisting they'd return someday. But his father had died 5 years ago, taking his secrets to the grave. A vehicle door slammed, jolting Marcus back to the present. A woman in a dark suit emerged from the lead car, speaking rapidly into a satellite phone. Unlike the others, she wore no protective gear, moving confidently through the mysterious crops as if she belonged there. "The transition phase should complete within 72 hours, she was saying. "After that, we'll need full containment protocols. The neighbors can't see what happens next. Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool autumn air. Containment protocols, neighbors. There were only 3 other families within 5 miles of this place. The woman ended her call and gestured to the hazmat team. They began packing their equipment with military efficiency, but Marcus noticed they left behind several monitoring devices scattered throughout the crops. Red lights blinked steadily, like electronic sentries guarding whatever secret his family's land harbored. As the vehicles prepared to leave, Marcus caught a glimpse of insignia on the lead car's door. Not government plates, but a symbol he didn't recognize. A spiral inside a triangle, etched in chrome. The convoy disappeared down the dirt road, leaving behind only the whisper of wind through impossibly perfect crops and the steady blinking of surveillance equipment. Marcus remained hidden until the sound of engines faded completely, then slowly emerged from his hiding spot. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the transformed farmland. In the gathering darkness, the mysterious vegetables seemed to glow with their own inner light, and Marcus realized his simple plan to sell the property had just become something far more dangerous. The weight of 20 years pressed down on Marcus's shoulders as he stood at the rusted gate of the Holloway farm. The metal groaned in protest when he pushed it open, hinges crying out like wounded animals. Weeds had claimed the gravel driveway, and what remained of the white fence posts leaned at drunken angles, their paint long since surrendered to wind and weather. He'd driven straight through from Chicago, 14 hours of interstate meditation that had done nothing to prepare him for this moment. The familiar ache in his chest, the one that had never quite healed, intensified as he took his first steps onto the property where he'd spent the first 18 years of his life. The farmhouse looked smaller than he remembered, its wraparound porch sagging like an old man's smile. Shutters hung askew, and several windows were boarded up with plywood that had weathered to grey. The red paint on the barn had faded to rust brown, and the silo listed slightly to the east, as if tired of standing upright. Marcus pulled the keys from his pocket, delivered by certified mail 3 weeks ago, along with the deed and a terse note from his father's lawyer. Thomas Holloway had been dead 6 months before anyone thought to notify his only son. The funeral had been small, the lawyer had said. Just a few neighbors and the pastor from the Methodist church in town. The front door stuck, warped from years of neglect, but finally gave way with a sharp crack. Inside, dust motes danced in the afternoon light streaming through gaps in the boards. The air was thick with the smell of abandonment. Mildew, mouse droppings, and something else, something organic and sweet that made his stomach turn. Everything was exactly as he'd left it, frozen in time like a museum exhibit. His mother's quilt still draped the furniture, now moth-eaten and faded. The family photographs on the mantelpiece were coated in grime, but he could still make out his younger self smiling beside parents who'd seemed so much older than their years. The silence felt oppressive, broken only by the settling of old wood and the distant whistle of wind through broken windows. Marcus had expected to feel something, nostalgia, sadness, even anger, but there was only a hollow numbness where his emotions should have been. He climbed the stairs to his old bedroom, each step a small act of courage. The door was ajar, and inside, his childhood remained perfectly preserved. Baseball trophies lined the shelves, and his old desk still held the homework he'd abandoned the night before he left for college, before the fight, before the words that couldn't be taken back. From the window, he could see the fields stretching toward the horizon, his father's pride and joy, once golden with corn that fed half the county. Now they lay fallow, a brown expanse of stubble and weeds that should have been plowed under years ago. But something was wrong with the landscape. Where the north field should have been empty, dark shapes dotted the earth in perfect rows. From this distance, they looked like massive stones, but stones didn't grow in patterns. Marcus squinted, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. He made his way downstairs and out the back door, crossing the yard toward the field. The closer he got, the more impossible the sight became. Rising from the earth in neat, agricultural precision were structures that defied explanation. They stood roughly 8 feet tall, cylindrical and smooth, with a surface that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They weren't stone or metal or anything else he could identify. There had to be at least 50 of them, maybe more, stretching across what had once been prime farmland. Each one was identical, emerging from the soil as if they'd grown there naturally. The earth around their bases was disturbed, but not freshly dug. Whatever these things were, they'd been here for some time. Marcus approached the nearest structure, his heart hammering against his ribs. Up close, the surface appeared almost organic, with a texture like polished bone. He reached out tentatively, then pulled his hand back. The air around the object hummed with an energy he could feel in his teeth. This was impossible. His father had been a corn farmer, nothing more. A simple man who worked the land his grandfather had worked, who went to church on Sundays and complained about the weather. There was no explanation for what Marcus was seeing, no rational way these things could exist. A sound made him turn, the distant rumble of an engine. A black SUV was making its way up the driveway, moving fast. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Nobody knew he was here. He'd told no one of his plans to visit the farm. The vehicle stopped beside his rental car, and 2 figures emerged. Even from this distance, Marcus could see they weren't locals. Their movements were too purposeful, too coordinated. They were looking for something, or someone. He crouched low, using the strange structures as cover, and began making his way back toward the house. Whatever his father had been hiding in these fields, other people knew about it. And they'd been waiting. The drive back to town felt like moving through molasses. Marcus gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white against the leather, trying to process what he'd witnessed in the field. The rational part of his mind, the part that had built a multi-million-dollar consulting firm from nothing, insisted there had to be an explanation. Plants didn't glow. They didn't pulse with their own internal light like some alien heartbeat. But he'd seen it, felt it even. That strange warmth radiating from the stalks, the way they seemed to lean toward him as if responding to his presence. The Riverside Motel sat on the edge of Millbrook like a relic from the 1960s, its neon sign flickering sporadically in the gathering dusk. Marcus had booked a room there partly for convenience, but mostly because he couldn't bring himself to stay at the farmhouse. Too many ghosts in those empty rooms, too many conversations that had ended in slammed doors and bitter silence. He pulled into the gravel lot and sat for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled. Through his windshield, he could see the motel's office window casting a yellow rectangle of light across the parking lot. A figure moved inside, probably Earl Hutchins, who'd owned the place for as long as Marcus could remember. The bell above the office door chimed as Marcus entered. Earl looked up from behind the counter, his weathered face breaking into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Marcus Chen, heard you were back in town." Earl's voice carried the careful neutrality of someone who'd perfected the art of small-town discretion. "Sorry for your loss. Your father was, well, he was a complicated man." "Thanks, Earl." Marcus approached the counter, studying the older man's expression. "I was wondering if you might know something about the farm. The fields, specifically." Earl's hands stilled on the registration book he'd been pretending to organize. "What about them?" "Dad was growing something out there. Something I don't recognize." Marcus chose his words carefully. "Have you noticed anything unusual lately? People coming and going, maybe asking questions about the property?" The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Earl's eyes flicked toward the window, then back to Marcus. When he spoke, his voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "You should leave well enough alone, son. Some things are better left buried." "What things?" Marcus leaned forward. Earl, what do you know about what's growing in those fields? I know your father made enemies. Earl's jaw tightened. I know there are people who'd rather see that land stay empty. And I know you're asking the kind of questions that got your father. The office door chimed again, cutting Earl off mid-sentence. A woman entered, her dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, wearing a jacket despite the warm evening. Her eyes swept the room, cataloguing everything in a way that made Marcus's instincts prickle. "Excuse me," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "I'm looking for the owner of the Chen property. I understand he might be staying here." She smiled, extending a hand. "Dr. Sarah Voss, Agricultural Research Division, State University. We've had reports of unusual crop growth in this area. I'd like to discuss a potential research partnership." Her handshake was firm, her credentials probably legitimate, but something felt off. The way she'd entered just as Earl was about to reveal something important. The practiced nature of her introduction. The fact that she'd known exactly where to find him. "How did you know I was here?" Marcus asked. "Small town," she replied smoothly. "Word travels fast. I was hoping we could discuss your father's agricultural methods. From what I understand, he achieved some remarkable results." Earl had gone completely still behind the counter, his face pale. In the silence, Marcus heard the distant rumble of an engine. Multiple engines, actually, growing closer. "I'm afraid I don't know much about farming," Marcus said, not taking his eyes off Dr. Voss. "I've been away for 20 years, but you've been back to the property today. It wasn't a question. You've seen what's growing there." The engine sounds were closer now, and through the window, Marcus caught sight of headlights turning into the motel parking lot. Too many headlights. His mouth went dry. "Earl," he said quietly, "is there a back exit?" But when he turned, the space behind the counter was empty. Earl had vanished, leaving only the faint squeak of a door closing somewhere in the back of the building. Dr. Voss's smile widened, and for the first time, it looked genuine. "I think it's time we had that conversation about your father's work, Mr. Chen. And about what you're going to do with what he left behind." Outside, car doors slammed in quick succession. Heavy footsteps approached the office door. The rain had stopped by the time Marcus reached the edge of the northern field, but the air still hung heavy with moisture and the scent of disturbed earth. His boots squelched in the mud as he approached the area where he'd seen the impossible growth the day before. The memory felt surreal now, like something half-remembered from a fever dream, but there it was. The patch of crystalline vegetation had expanded overnight, spreading in a perfect circle roughly 20 feet in diameter. What had been small, delicate structures yesterday now stood nearly waist-high, their translucent surfaces catching the pale morning light and refracting it into prismatic rainbows. Marcus crouched at the edge of the phenomenon, careful not to touch anything. The plants, if they could be called that, pulsed with an inner luminescence that seemed to follow no natural rhythm. Some kind of energy moved through them, visible as faint currents of light flowing from root to tip. The soil around them had changed too, taking on a darker, richer quality that seemed almost metallic. A sound behind him made Marcus spin around. A woman stood at the tree line, maybe 40 yards away, watching him with undisguised interest. She was tall and lean, dressed in dark clothing that seemed deliberately nondescript. When their eyes met, she didn't look away or pretend she hadn't been staring. "You must be Marcus," she called out, walking toward him with confident strides. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen. I worked with your father." Marcus stood slowly, his muscles tensing. "My father was a farmer. He didn't work with doctors." "Your father was many things." She stopped about 10 feet away, close enough to talk comfortably but far enough to run if necessary. "May I?" She gestured toward the glowing patch. "I don't know what you may or may not do. I don't know who you are or how you knew to find me here." Dr. Chen pulled out a worn leather wallet and showed him an ID card. The logo belonged to something called the Agricultural Research Division, a name that meant nothing to Marcus. Your father contacted us 15 years ago. He'd discovered something in his soil, something that shouldn't exist. What kind of something? The kind that certain people would kill for. She looked directly at the crystalline growth. The kind that your father spent the last years of his life trying to understand and contain. Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath his feet, metaphorically speaking. Contain? You're talking like this is some kind of weapon. Not a weapon. Something much more valuable. Dr. Chen pulled out a small device that looked like a cross between a Geiger counter and a smartphone. It began clicking rapidly as she pointed it toward the growth. Your father discovered a form of plant life that can transmute elements at the molecular level. Those aren't just pretty lights you're seeing. That's matter being converted from one form to another. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. You're talking about alchemy. That's impossible. So is most of what we've learned about quantum mechanics, but it still works. She pocketed the device. Your father was a smart man, smarter than most people gave him credit for. He realized what he'd found, and he knew the dangers. What dangers? Dr. Chen pointed to the expanding circle of transformed soil. This doesn't stop growing on its own. Left unchecked, it would eventually consume everything, the farm, the county, possibly much more. Your father developed a way to limit its spread, to harvest small amounts safely. He's been sending us samples for years. Marcus thought about the locked room in the basement, the equipment he couldn't identify, the laboratory. You found it. It wasn't a question. Then you know he was conducting serious research. The question is whether he told you how to control this before he died. He didn't tell me anything. We hadn't spoken in 20 years. Dr. Chen's expression darkened. That's what I was afraid of. Marcus, your father's death wasn't an accident. There are people who want to weaponize this discovery, and they've been watching this place. When they realize you don't have the control protocols, a sharp crack echoed across the field, the sound of a rifle shot. Dr. Chen spun and dropped to one knee, pulling a gun from inside her jacket with practiced efficiency. We need to move, now. Another shot kicked up dirt near Marcus's feet. He could see muzzle flashes from the tree line on the opposite side of the field. At least 2 shooters, maybe more. This way. Dr. Chen grabbed his arm and pulled him toward a depression in the ground that would provide some cover. As they ran, Marcus noticed something strange. The crystalline plants were responding to the gunfire, their inner light pulsing faster and brighter with each shot. They're reacting to the sound, he shouted over another volley. Not the sound, Dr. Chen called back. The kinetic energy. They feed on it. They dove into the shallow ditch, just as the shooting intensified. Marcus pressed his face into the mud and realized that everything he thought he knew about his father, his family, and this farm had been a carefully constructed lie. The morning sun cast long shadows across the impossible field as Marcus crouched beside one of the crystalline stalks, his breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. Sleep had eluded him entirely, his mind racing with questions that seemed to multiply with each passing hour. The plants, if they could even be called that, had grown another 6 inches since yesterday, their translucent surfaces now pulsing with an almost hypnotic rhythm. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Board meeting moved to Thursday. Everything okay? You sound strange. Strange didn't begin to cover it. Marcus typed back a quick response about needing more time to assess the property, then powered off the device entirely. Whatever was happening here, he couldn't afford distractions from his other life. A metallic glint caught his eye near the base of the nearest stalk. Brushing away the dark soil, Marcus uncovered a small brass plate, green with age, but still readable. The inscription made his blood run cold. Project Synthesis. Field Trial 7 to 1997. 1997. The year his father had changed, becoming increasingly paranoid and secretive. The year Marcus had stopped coming home for holidays, using college and then work as excuses to avoid the uncomfortable silences and his father's haunted stares. The sound of gravel crunching under tires made Marcus pocket the plate quickly. A black sedan was approaching down the farm's long driveway, moving slowly, deliberately. He recognized neither the car nor the two figures visible through the windshield. Marcus stood, wiping his hands on his jeans as the sedan stopped near the farmhouse. Two people emerged, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back severely, and a younger man whose expensive suit looked absurdly out of place in the rural setting. Both wore the kind of neutral expressions that suggested they were accustomed to delivering bad news. "Mr. Holloway?" The woman approached with measured steps, her gaze flicking briefly toward the field behind him. "I'm Dr. Catherine Voss, and this is my associate, David Chen. We need to discuss your father's property." "I wasn't expecting visitors." Marcus kept his voice steady, though his pulse quickened. "What kind of discussion?" Dr. Voss smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes, the kind that could be very beneficial for everyone involved. "Your father's research was groundbreaking. We represent certain interests that would be willing to compensate you handsomely for access to his work." "Research?" Marcus affected confusion, though pieces were beginning to form a disturbing picture. "My father was a farmer. What kind of research are you talking about?" The younger man, Chen, stepped forward. "Mr. Holloway, we know what's growing in that field. Your father was part of something extraordinary, something that could change the world. But it's also something that requires careful management." A chill ran down Marcus's spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. These people knew about the crystalline plants, had perhaps been waiting for his arrival. "I think you have me confused with someone else. There's nothing here but an old farm." Dr. Voss's patience seemed to thin. "Your father left detailed records, journals, data, biological samples. We know he continued the work even after the official program ended. The question is whether you're going to be reasonable about this, or whether we need to explore other options." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Marcus found himself calculating distances, to the house, to his car, to the nearest neighbor who probably lived miles away. What kind of other options? "The kind that don't end well for anyone," Chen said quietly. Dr. Holloway was brilliant, but he was also reckless. He took materials that didn't belong to him, continued experiments that had been deemed too dangerous to pursue. When he disappeared 3 years ago, we hoped the research had died with him. Disappeared? The word hit Marcus like a physical blow. "My father died of a heart attack. I saw the death certificate." Dr. Voss and Chen exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. "Is that what you were told?" Dr. Voss asked softly. "How convenient, how neat and tidy." The implications crashed over Marcus in waves. His father hadn't died peacefully in his sleep. These people, or others like them, had been hunting him, and now they were here, standing in the same field where impossible things grew from soil that might be fertilized with secrets too dangerous to exist. "What do you want?" Marcus asked finally. "Full access to the property and all research materials," Dr. Voss replied. "In exchange, you receive a generous settlement and the opportunity to walk away from something you clearly don't understand." "And if I refuse?" Chen's smile was cold. "Then you'll learn exactly what happened to your father. And, trust me, Mr. Holloway, that's not a lesson you want to experience firsthand." The crystalline plants seemed to pulse faster in Marcus's peripheral vision, as if responding to the tension in the air. Whatever his father had discovered, whatever he had created or unleashed, Marcus was now standing at the center of it. And these people would kill to control it. The question was, would he let them? The headlights cut through the darkness as Marcus drove back toward town, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. The image of Sarah's lifeless eyes burned in his memory, and every shadow seemed to conceal another threat. He'd called 911 from her house, stammering through an explanation that sounded insane even to him, then fled when he heard sirens approaching from multiple directions. Now, parked outside the Riverside Motel on the outskirts of town, he sat in his rental car, trying to piece together the fragments of his shattered understanding. His phone buzzed with missed calls from Detective Morrison, but Marcus couldn't bring himself to answer. How could he explain that his childhood friend was dead because of something growing in his family's field, something that shouldn't exist? The manila envelope Sarah had pressed into his hands lay on the passenger seat, its contents still unexplored. With shaking fingers, Marcus opened it and pulled out a stack of yellowed documents. The top sheet was a property deed dated 1952, transferring ownership of his family's land from someone named Wilhelm Brennan to his grandfather, Thomas Holloway. But it wasn't a normal sale. The price listed was $1, and stamped across the bottom in red ink were the words, "Government Acquisition." Beneath the deed were laboratory reports bearing the letterhead of something called Project Verdant, with dates spanning from 1948 to 1963. The pages were filled with technical jargon about soil composition, cellular regeneration, and genetic modification that made Marcus's head spin. But certain phrases leaped out at him: accelerated growth protocols, enhanced nutritional density, and most disturbing of all, human compatibility trials. A photograph slipped from between the pages, a black and white image of his grandfather standing beside a man in a military uniform in front of what looked like his family's barn. On the back, someone had written in faded ink, T. Holloway and Colonel Morrison, June 1952. Morrison, the same name as the detective who'd been asking questions about his return to town. Marcus's phone rang, making him jump. Unknown number. "Hello? Mr. Holloway." The voice was crisp, authoritative. "My name is Colonel James Morrison. I believe you have something that belongs to us." The photograph suddenly felt heavy in Marcus's hand. Morrison, related to the detective? My grandson. Bright boy, following in the family tradition of protecting important secrets. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About how my grandfather was involved in some kind of government experiment. About how Sarah Chen is dead because she tried to help me." A pause. Miss Chen's death was unfortunate. She should have left well enough alone. "But you still have a choice, Mr. Holloway. We can meet peacefully, or we can handle this another way." Through the motel room window, Marcus saw two black SUVs pull into the parking lot. His blood ran cold. "What do you want?" "The same thing we've wanted for 70 years. To keep Project Verdant contained. Your grandfather understood the importance of that responsibility. We hoped you would too." Marcus grabbed the envelope and bolted from his room, heading for the back exit. "My grandfather never told me about any of this, because he was a patriot who understood that some knowledge is too dangerous for civilian hands. The work we did in those fields, it was necessary. The Cold War was beginning, and America needed every advantage we could develop." "Work? You mean experiments on food? On people?" The back door of the motel opened onto a wooded area. Marcus plunged into the trees, his phone still pressed to his ear. "The applications were far broader than simple agriculture, Mr. Holloway. What we developed could feed armies, heal wounds, extend human endurance beyond normal limits. But it required careful cultivation, specific conditions that only exist in certain soil types. Your family's land was perfect." Marcus stumbled over a root, but kept running. Behind him, he could hear shouting and the slam of car doors. "And now? What's growing out there now?" "A remnant. Something that should have been destroyed decades ago, but somehow survived dormant in the soil. Your return, your presence on the land, it triggered something. Old genetic markers, perhaps. We're still investigating. A beam of light swept through the trees nearby. Marcus crouched behind a fallen log, trying to control his breathing. Why kill Sarah? She was just trying to help. Ms. Chen accessed classified files that should have been destroyed. She knew too much, and she was going to expose everything. We couldn't allow that. Marcus thought of Sarah's determined face, her insistence that he deserved to know the truth about his family. She'd died for trying to help him understand his past. I'm not going to just disappear quietly. I was afraid you'd say that. The colonel's voice hardened. Your grandfather was more reasonable. He understood the greater good. The light beam swept closer. Marcus clutched the envelope tighter and prepared to run deeper into the woods. Find him, he heard someone call in the distance, and make sure he doesn't leave these woods alive. The metallic taste of fear coated Marcus's mouth as he crouched behind the barn, listening to the stranger's footsteps crunch across the gravel driveway. 3 sets of boots, moving with military precision toward the farmhouse. He pressed his back against the weathered wood, clutching the soil sample jar so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Through a gap in the barn siding, he watched them approach his rental car. The leader, a tall woman with silver hair pulled into a severe bun, gestured to her companions. One man began examining the vehicle while the other positioned himself near the front porch. They moved like professionals, and that terrified him more than anything else. Marcus's phone buzzed against his chest. Dr. Sarah Chen's name appeared on the screen, but he didn't dare answer. The sound might give away his position, and right now, invisibility was his only advantage. He let it go to voicemail, hoping she had answers about the impossible plants growing in his father's field. The woman's voice carried across the yard, cold and authoritative. Vehicle's still warm. He's here somewhere. She turned toward the barn, and Marcus felt his heart skip. Check the outbuildings. He had minutes, maybe less. Moving as quietly as possible, Marcus slipped deeper into the barn's shadows. Dust motes danced in shafts of afternoon sunlight, streaming through broken boards. The familiar smell of old hay and rusted metal brought back childhood memories. Hiding from his father's anger in this same space, listening to heated arguments between his parents that always seemed to center around the back 40 acres. A loose floorboard creaked under his weight, and Marcus froze. Had they heard? He strained his ears but caught only the distant murmur of voices near the house. Carefully, he knelt and examined the board that had given way. It wasn't just loose. It had been deliberately cut and fitted back into place, creating a hidden compartment. With trembling fingers, Marcus pried up the board. Beneath lay a metal box, its surface green with age but still intact. His father's initials were scratched into the lid. R.H. Robert Hartwell. Marcus lifted the box with reverence, as if handling a sacred artifact. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were documents that made his breath catch. Military records bearing his father's name, but not from any unit Marcus had ever heard his father mention. Project Verdant, classified stamps, covered nearly every page, but what he could read made his skin crawl. References to biological enhancement, agricultural applications, and something called genetic acceleration protocols. A photograph slipped from between the pages, his father in military fatigues, standing beside what looked like the very field Marcus had visited that morning. But in the photo, the plants were different, larger, more alien, and his father wasn't alone. The same silver-haired woman now searching for him stood at Robert's side, decades younger but unmistakably the same person. The barn door groaned open behind him. "Don't move!" The woman's voice was closer than he'd expected. Marcus's hands stilled over the documents, but he didn't turn around. Slowly place everything back in the box and stand up. Marcus complied, his mind racing. "You knew my father." Robert was a good man who made difficult choices. Her footsteps approached steadily, choices that kept dangerous knowledge contained. Until now. What is this place? What did he do here? He protected the world from something it wasn't ready for, something you've now awakened by taking samples from that field. The woman paused directly behind him. The plants respond to genetic familiarity. They've been dormant for 20 years, waiting for Robert's bloodline to return. Marcus finally turned to face her. Up close, she was older than she'd appeared in the photograph, but her eyes held the same intensity. "Who are you?" "Colonel Diana Reeves. Though I'm retired now, I've spent 2 decades ensuring Project Verdant stayed buried." She gestured to the box in his hands. "Your father contacted me before he died, made me promise to handle things if his family ever returned to the farm." "Handle things how?" Reeves's expression softened slightly. "That depends on you, Marcus. The samples you took this morning, they're already beginning to change, adapt. Within hours, they could become something far beyond our control. We need them back, and we need the field sterilized." Marcus thought of Dr. Chen, probably examining those very samples at this moment. "And if I refuse? Then I'll have to treat you as your father would have wanted, as a security threat that needs permanent resolution." Reeves's hand moved to her jacket, where the outline of a weapon was clearly visible. "He loved you enough to leave, Marcus. Don't make his sacrifice meaningless." Outside, one of her men called out, "Colonel, we've got movement at the tree line. 3 vehicles approaching fast." Reeves cursed under her breath. "Your scientist friend just became our biggest problem." Marcus's hands trembled as he held the faded photograph, his father's young face staring back at him from beside 2 men he'd never seen before. The timestamp in the corner read 1987, 3 years before Marcus was born. Behind them stood a facility he didn't recognize, all concrete and steel with no windows on the ground floor. "Project Verdant," Sarah whispered, reading the text scrawled on the back. "Agricultural Enhancement Division, Phase 1. The basement felt smaller now, the weight of discovery pressing down on them. Marcus flipped through more documents scattered across his father's desk, each page revealing another piece of a puzzle he wasn't sure he wanted to complete. Technical reports filled with terminology he barely understood. Genetic modification, accelerated growth cycles, enhanced nutritional profiles. "Look at this," Sarah said, pulling a manila folder from beneath a stack of journals. Inside were medical records, dozens of them. Names he didn't recognize, dates spanning several years, and symptoms that made his stomach clench. Neurological degradation, cellular mutation, systemic organ failure. "Test subjects," Marcus breathed. They were using people as test subjects. Sarah's face had gone pale. "The vegetables we found out there, they're not just genetically modified, they're something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist." A floorboard creaked overhead. They both froze, listening. Another creak, then the unmistakable sound of the front door opening. Marcus quickly gathered the most important documents, stuffing them into his jacket while Sarah replaced the others exactly as they'd found them. Footsteps moved across the kitchen floor above, deliberate and searching. Male voices, at least 2 of them, speaking in low tones Marcus couldn't quite make out. Sarah pointed toward the basement's back corner, where a small window sat level with the ground outside. It would be tight, but they could fit through if they moved quietly. Marcus nodded, and they crept across the concrete floor, avoiding the patches where their footsteps might echo upward. "Check the basement," came a voice from above, clearer now. "Reynolds said he might have hidden backup files down there." Marcus's blood turned to ice. Reynolds, the man from the cornfield, the one who'd tried to kill him. These people weren't just watching. They were actively searching for the same information he'd just found. The basement stairs groaned under heavy footsteps. Sarah was already working the window latch, her fingers fumbling with the corroded metal. Marcus pressed himself against the wall beside the stairs, listening to the descent. Work boots on wooden steps, getting closer. The latch gave way with a soft click, that sounded deafening in the confined space. Sarah pushed the window open and immediately began squeezing through the narrow opening. Marcus waited, counting the seconds, knowing that any moment a flashlight beam would sweep across the basement and find them. A boot appeared on the bottom step. Marcus dove for the window just as Sarah's legs disappeared through the opening. He thrust his head and shoulders through, feeling the frame scrape against his ribs. Behind him, a flashlight clicked on, its beam dancing across the basement walls. "Someone's been down here," the voice said. "Recently." Marcus pulled himself through the window, landing hard on the damp earth outside. Sarah grabbed his arm, helping him to his feet, and together they ran in a crouch toward the tree line that bordered the property. They didn't stop until they reached Marcus's truck, parked a quarter-mile away on the old logging road. Only then did they allow themselves to breathe properly, chests heaving as adrenaline slowly faded. "We can't go to the police," Sarah said, leaning against the truck's hood. "If this project was government-sanctioned, if it had official backing, then reporting it could get us killed faster than those men ever could." Marcus pulled out the documents he'd saved, spreading them across the truck's tailgate under the dome light. Birth certificates, medical records, and financial documents painted a picture that made him sick. His father hadn't just been involved in Project Verdant, he'd been one of its primary architects. "Look at this payment record," Sarah said, pointing to a bank statement dated 1988. $25,000 deposited monthly for 18 months. That's serious money for a small-town farmer. "Blood money," Marcus corrected. The pieces were falling into place now, creating an image he desperately wanted to reject. He helped them test whatever they created. Maybe provided the farmland, maybe helped recruit subjects from the local community. But why? Sarah asked. What could they possibly have offered him that was worth this? Marcus found his answer in the last document he pulled from his jacket. A medical diagnosis for his mother, dated 6 months before the first payment. Stage 4 cancer, terminal prognosis, experimental treatment recommended. "They offered to save her life," he whispered. "And she died anyway." The implications hit him like physical blows. His father's guilt, his drinking, his eventual abandonment of the farm, it all made terrible sense now, but it also raised new questions. If the project had ended decades ago, why were those vegetables still growing? And why were people still willing to kill to protect its secrets? The morning air carried the scent of rain and something else, something Marcus couldn't identify, but that made his skin crawl. He stood at the kitchen window, watching grey clouds gather over the fields where the impossible plants continued their relentless growth. 3 days had passed since Sarah's warning, and every sunrise revealed the vegetation had spread further. His phone buzzed. Another blocked number. "Stop digging, Marcus. Some graves are meant to stay closed." The voice was different this time, older, weathered like leather left in the sun. Marcus gripped the phone tighter. "Who is this? What did my father do?" A low chuckle crackled through the speaker. "Your father was a good man who made a terrible choice. Don't repeat his mistakes." The line went dead. Marcus paced the kitchen, his mind racing. The threats were escalating, becoming more personal. Someone was watching him, tracking his movements. He thought about the county records office, the strange looks from the clerk, the missing documents from 1998. That year kept surfacing like a persistent weed. He needed answers, and there was only one place left to look. The basement door groaned as he descended into the musty darkness below the farmhouse. He'd avoided this space during his first few days back, telling himself he was focused on the fields, the immediate mysteries. But the truth was simpler. He was afraid of what he might find in his father's private domain. Dust motes danced in the weak light, filtering through grimy windows. Wooden shelves lined the walls, heavy with mason jars filled with unidentifiable specimens floating in murky liquid. Marcus's stomach lurched as he realized some of the shapes looked organic, possibly biological samples. In the far corner, beneath a canvas tarp, he found his father's desk. The wood was scarred and stained, covered with papers that had yellowed with age. Marcus pulled the chain on an old desk lamp, and harsh light flooded across decades of careful documentation. His father's handwriting filled notebook after notebook, precise entries dating back to 1995. Marcus opened the earliest journal, his hands trembling slightly. Day 1. Initial planting successful. Seeds from the Morrison site show remarkable adaptability. Growth rate exceeds all projections. Morrison site. Marcus had never heard his father mention anyone named Morrison. He flipped through pages of measurements, sketches of plant structures that looked alien, and detailed observations of growth patterns that defied natural law. Day 127. Plants responding to treatment beyond anticipated parameters. Dr. Chen warns about contamination risks, but the potential applications are extraordinary. Military interest confirmed. Dr. Chen, the military. Marcus felt his world tilting on its axis. His father hadn't been a simple farmer experimenting with crops. This was something else entirely, something that involved government contracts and scientific research that pushed ethical boundaries. The entries became more frantic as the years progressed. Day 892, Chen is dead. Car accident, they claim, but I know better. The project is compromised. They want to shut us down, bury the research. 20 years of work, and they're calling it too dangerous. Marcus's blood ran cold. Dr. Chen had died in a car accident, just like his parents. The coincidence felt too deliberate, too convenient. He found what he was looking for in the 1998 entries. Final day, they've made their position clear. Continue the work or face the consequences. But I've seen what these plants can do when they mature, how they affect everything around them. I cannot allow this knowledge to spread. Tonight, I destroy the fields. Margaret understands. If something happens to us, Marcus must never know. The seeds buried deep will remain dormant as long as the soil stays undisturbed. The notebook slipped from Marcus's fingers. His father had tried to destroy the research, and it had gotten his parents killed. But something had gone wrong. The plants weren't destroyed. They'd been waiting underground for 20 years, waiting for someone to disturb the soil and trigger their return. A floorboard creaked above him. Marcus froze, listening. Another creak, then the unmistakable sound of footsteps moving through the kitchen. He hadn't heard a car approach, which meant whoever was upstairs had been careful to arrive quietly. He gathered the most important notebooks, stuffing them inside his jacket. The basement had a second exit through the storm cellar, but reaching it meant crossing the open floor. The footsteps above moved methodically, searching. Marcus killed the desk lamp and crept toward the storm cellar steps. Behind him, the basement door opened with a groan that seemed to echo through his bones. "We know you're down there, Marcus." A man's voice, calm and professional. "We just want to talk." Marcus didn't believe that for a second. He reached the storm cellar steps as a flashlight beam swept across the basement floor. His heart hammered as he climbed toward the outside doors, praying the old hinges wouldn't betray him. The metal doors opened silently, and he emerged into the grey morning. Rain had begun to fall, mixing with the unnatural mist rising from the fields where his father's deadly legacy continued to grow. The fluorescent lights in Dr. Chen's laboratory hummed like angry wasps as Marcus watched her examine the soil samples under a high-powered microscope. Her brow furrowed deeper with each adjustment of the lens, and the silence stretched until it felt suffocating. "This shouldn't be possible," she murmured, leaning back from the eyepiece. "Marcus, where exactly did you say you collected these samples?" "From my father's old wheat field, the section where nothing should grow." He shifted uncomfortably on the metal stool. "What are you seeing?" Dr. Chen pulled up a chair beside him, her expression troubled. The mineral composition is unlike anything in our geological surveys of this region. There are trace elements here that simply don't occur naturally in Iowa soil. Rare earth metals primarily, but in concentrations that suggest what? That someone introduced them artificially. And recently. She turned to her computer, pulling up a series of colorful charts. These readings indicate the contamination happened within the last 20 to 5 years, but the distribution pattern is too uniform to be accidental. Someone deliberately treated that soil. Marcus felt his chest tighten. 25 years ago, he would have been 8 years old, still helping his father with morning chores before the drinking got worse. Could this contamination cause unusual plant growth? Theoretically, yes. Rare earth elements can act as growth stimulants in certain plants, but they're typically toxic in high concentrations. What you're describing, accelerated growth, unusual size, it would require a very specific combination of elements and conditions. She paused, studying his face. Marcus, you need to tell me exactly what's growing out there. Before he could answer, the laboratory door burst open. Sarah rushed in, her face flushed from running. Marcus, we have a problem. That journalist, Kate Morrison, she's at the farm. She's asking questions about your father and something called Project Verdant. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd heard it whispered between his parents during one of their late-night arguments, back when they still thought he was sleeping. His father had been drunk, rambling about debts and promises, while his mother pleaded with him to stop whatever he was doing. Dr. Chen's expression darkened. Project Verdant? Sarah, are you certain that's what she said? You know about it. Marcus stood abruptly, the stool scraping against the floor. Both of you know something you're not telling me. Sarah exchanged a meaningful look with Dr. Chen before speaking. 23 years ago, there were rumors about government agricultural experiments in this area. Black budget research into enhanced crop yields. Most people assumed it was just conspiracy theory nonsense, but several farms in a 50-mile radius reported unusual phenomena. Dr. Chen finished. Crops growing at impossible rates, yields that defied explanation. Then, within a year, all those farms went bankrupt. The families sold out to shell companies and disappeared. Marcus felt the room spinning around him. My father never sold. We left, but he kept paying the taxes, kept the deed. Because he couldn't sell, Sarah said quietly. The contamination would have shown up in any soil survey required for a legitimate sale. He was trapped with whatever deal he'd made. The implications crashed over Marcus in waves. His father hadn't been just a failed farmer driven to drink by bad luck and poor decisions. He'd been involved in something that had ultimately destroyed their family, and now Marcus had stumbled back into the middle of it. The people who've been watching me, he said, pieces clicking into place. They're not just interested in the land, they're protecting the secret. Dr. Chen nodded grimly. If Project Verdant was what I think it was, there would be people with very strong motivations to keep it buried. Agricultural bioweapons research was officially banned by international treaty in the 80s, but that doesn't mean it stopped. Bioweapons? Marcus felt sick. My father was growing bioweapons in our wheat field. Not weapons, necessarily, Sarah said, but enhanced organisms that could be weaponized, or agricultural techniques that could give one nation a massive advantage over others. The potential applications would be worth billions. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. Tell your journalist friend to leave. Some secrets should stay buried. You have until sunset. He showed the message to Sarah and Dr. Chen. The color drained from Sarah's face. We need to get to Kate before they do, Marcus said, but Dr. Chen grabbed his arm. Wait. If they're threatening her, it means they're getting desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. She pulled out her own phone. I'm calling the FBI. This is beyond what local law enforcement can handle. And if they kill Kate while we're waiting for federal agents to drive here from Des Moines? Sarah was already heading for the door. Then we'd better move fast. But Marcus, once we do this, there's no going back. Whatever your father was involved in, we're about to drag it all into the light. Marcus looked at the soil samples one last time, then followed her out into the fading afternoon sun. The basement beneath Dr. Chen's laboratory felt like descending into another world. Marcus followed her down narrow concrete steps, the air growing colder with each level. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows on the walls, and somewhere in the distance he could hear the hum of machinery. "How long have you been studying the specimens?" Marcus asked, his voice echoing in the confined space. "Officially, 3 months." Chen paused at a heavy steel door, entering a code on a digital keypad. "Unofficially, I've been tracking anomalous botanical reports in this region for over a year. Your farm wasn't the first site." The door clicked open, revealing a pristine laboratory that seemed impossibly large for being underground. Glass containers lined the walls, each containing samples that made Marcus's stomach turn. Plants that pulsed with their own rhythm, vines that moved without wind, and in the center of the room, a sealed chamber containing a small section of the black soil from his father's fields. "We've isolated 17 distinct species so far," Chen said, pulling on latex gloves. "None of them exist in any botanical database. It's as if they evolved in complete isolation, following entirely different rules." Marcus approached the central chamber. Even through the glass, he could see the soil writhing with microscopic activity. What makes them grow? What triggers it? That's what's fascinating. Chen activated a computer terminal, and the room's lights dimmed. Under ultraviolet illumination, the specimens began to glow with an ethereal blue-green light. They respond to human presence, specifically to genetic markers that we're still trying to identify. But here's the terrifying part. They're not just growing randomly, they're following a pattern. She pulled up a satellite image on her screen, overlaying it with data points that showed glowing dots scattered across the county. Marcus counted at least 20 locations, forming what looked almost like a constellation. Each site corresponds to properties owned by families who've lived here for over 50 years, Chen continued. Old farming families, generational landowners, and every single one of them has had at least one family member disappear under mysterious circumstances in the past 2 decades. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "My father." "Among others, yes." Chen's expression was grim. "We think the plants aren't just growing, they're searching. They're using the genetic memories stored in the soil, the accumulated biological traces left by generations of the same families, to locate something specific, or someone." A new voice echoed through the laboratory, and Marcus spun around to see Sarah Chen stepping out from behind a bank of equipment. But something was wrong with her eyes. They held the same vacant quality he'd seen in the townspeople. "Sarah?" Dr. Chen stepped protectively in front of Marcus. "How did you get down here?" "The same way they all do, eventually." Sarah's voice carried an odd, melodic quality that raised the hair on Marcus's arms. "The soil calls, and we answer. We've been waiting so long for him to come home." Marcus backed toward the exit, but found his path blocked by 2 more figures, the man from the gas station and Mrs. Hoffman from the diner. All of them wore the same serene, empty expression. "You can't leave yet," Sarah continued, moving closer. "Not when you're so close to understanding. Your father tried to leave too, you know. Tried to burn the fields and break the cycle, but the roots go deeper than fire can reach." Dr. Chen grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall, holding it like a weapon. "Marcus, there's another exit through the storage room. Go!" But as Marcus turned, he saw more figures emerging from the shadows. People he didn't recognize, but who all shared that same haunting, vacant stare. They moved with unnatural coordination, forming a circle around him and Chen. "The plants aren't invasive species," Sarah said. her voice now harmonizing with itself in impossible ways. "They're native, more native than anything else that's ever grown here. They were here first, waiting in the deep soil, waiting for the right families to tend them, to feed them." Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. Dark tendrils were seeping under the laboratory door, the same black vines from his father's fields. They spread across the floor with purpose, reaching toward him specifically. "What do you want?" he demanded. "Completion," the assembled figures said in unison. "Your bloodline carries the key, the genetic sequence that allows us to spread beyond these boundaries. Your father understood, eventually. Why do you think he really never left?" The vines reached Marcus's feet, and he felt a strange, tingling sensation as they made contact with his shoes. Images flashed through his mind. His father working in the fields, not planting crops, but carefully tending to something far older and more terrible. Generation after generation of his family, bound to this land not by choice, but by something written in their very DNA. Dr. Chen fired the extinguisher, filling the room with chemical fog, but the figures continued advancing through the white cloud. Marcus could hear his father's voice now, carried on the wind that somehow reached them even underground. "Come home, son. It's time to finish what we started." The basement beneath the farmhouse felt like descending into a tomb. Marcus followed Elena down the narrow wooden steps, each creak echoing in the confined space. The air grew thicker with every step, heavy with the smell of damp earth and something else, something organic and alive. "Your father built this during the Korean War," Elena said, her flashlight beam dancing across stone walls. Officially, it was a root cellar, but he had other plans. The basement opened into a chamber much larger than the house's footprint should have allowed. Marcus ran his hand along the wall, feeling the rough-hewn stone that seemed to pulse with warmth. How is this possible? He dug for months. Your mother thought he'd lost his mind. Elena moved toward the far wall where metal shelving lined the space, filled with glass jars and leather-bound journals. But Thomas knew what he'd found in those fields. He knew it needed to be protected. Marcus approached the shelves, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. The jars contained what looked like soil samples, each meticulously labeled with dates spanning decades. Some samples glowed with that familiar golden luminescence, while others appeared ordinary. The journals bore his father's careful handwriting, observations, measurements, theories. "He was studying it," Marcus whispered, pulling one journal from the shelf. The pages were filled with sketches of plant structures, chemical formulas, and notes about growth patterns. All these years he was trying to understand it. "Read the entry from August 1987, Elena said quietly. Marcus flipped through the pages, finding the date. His father's handwriting seemed more urgent here, the letters pressed deep into the paper. "Ethy entity responds to emotional trauma. Sarah's accident triggered another manifestation. 3 acres of the corn grew overnight, reaching impossible heights. The golden threads beneath the soil pulsed for hours. I fear we've awakened something that feeds on human suffering. Must find a way to contain it before it spreads beyond the farm boundaries." "Sarah," Marcus breathed. "My sister. She died when I was 8. In the barn, yes. But Thomas never told you the whole truth." Elena's voice carried a weight of old sorrow. "Sarah didn't just fall from the loft. She was running from something she saw in the fields that night." The journal trembled in Marcus's hands. He remembered fragments, Sarah's screams, his parents' frantic voices, the way his father had forbidden him from playing near the barn afterward. What did she see? The same thing you're seeing now. The golden growth, the impossible plants. But back then, your father hadn't learned to control it yet. Elena moved to another section of shelving, revealing more specialized equipment. Soil testing devices, microscopes, even what looked like Geiger counters. After Sarah's death, he became obsessed with understanding what they'd inherited with this land. Marcus found more entries, his father's research becoming increasingly desperate and detailed. References to the Ashford Consortium appeared frequently, along with names Marcus didn't recognize. But one name made him freeze: Dr. Catherine Reeves, dated just 3 years ago. "Reeves was here," he said. "She met with my father multiple times." She claimed to represent a research foundation interested in agricultural anomalies. Thomas was lonely, proud of his work. He showed her too much. Elena's flashlight illuminated a workbench covered with maps. Red X's marked locations across 3 counties. She wasn't interested in research. She was mapping the extent of the growth. The maps revealed the terrifying scope of what lay beneath their feet. The Golden Network extended far beyond Marcus's property, threading through neighboring farms, following underground water sources, reaching toward the river that fed the county's water supply. "It's spreading," Marcus realized. "Has been for decades." "Slowly, yes. But lately, something's changed. The growth is accelerating." Elena pointed to recent markings on the map, all within the past 6 months. "Your father's death may have been the catalyst. Strong emotions, traumatic events. They act like fertilizer to whatever this thing is." A sound from upstairs made them both freeze. Footsteps, deliberate and careful, moving across the kitchen floor. Marcus killed his flashlight, and Elena did the same, plunging them into darkness so complete it felt solid. "The back exit," Elena whispered, barely audible. "Through the root cellar." They moved by touch, feeling their way along the wall toward a passage Marcus hadn't noticed. The footsteps above multiplied. At least 3 people, maybe more. Voices filtered down through the floorboards, too muffled to understand, but clearly searching. The passage led to a narrow tunnel that sloped upward, carved from the same warm stone as the chamber. Marcus's claustrophobia clawed at him as they crawled through the confined space, Elena's breathing the only sound ahead of him. They emerged behind a cluster of overgrown bushes 50 yards from the house. Through the windows, flashlight beams moved systematically through the rooms. Marcus counted at least 4 figures in dark clothing, their movements professional and coordinated. "Ashford's people," Elena confirmed. "They know you found the basement." "How?" "They've been watching, waiting for you to lead them to your father's real research." She gripped his arm. "We can't go back there, Marcus. Everything in that basement, it's lost." The descent into the underground chamber felt like traveling through time itself. Marcus's flashlight beam danced across walls carved from living rock, revealing symbols that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Sarah's hand gripped his shoulder as they navigated the narrow stone steps, each footfall echoing in the darkness below. "How deep does this go?" she whispered. Dr. Chen's voice drifted up from ahead. "The electromagnetic readings suggest at least 50 feet. But Marcus, these symbols, they're identical to ones I've documented in Tibet, in the Amazon, in places where certain plants have grown for millennia." The air grew warmer as they descended, carrying that same sweet, otherworldly fragrance that permeated the fields above. But here, concentrated in the confined space, it made Marcus's head swim with half-formed memories. His father's face, younger, more desperate than he'd ever seen him. Hushed conversations in the barn, the taste of something bitter on his tongue. "I remember now," Marcus said suddenly, stopping mid-step. "Dad made me drink something when I was 7. Said it would help me forget the bad dreams. I thought he meant nightmares, but you were seeing things," Dr. Chen finished. "Children are more sensitive to the psychoactive compounds. Your father was protecting you from the truth." They reached the bottom of the stairs, emerging into a circular chamber that took Marcus's breath away. The walls were lined with shelves carved directly from the stone, each holding clay vessels, bundles of dried plants, and leather-bound journals. In the center of the room stood a stone table, its surface stained dark with decades of use. Sarah aimed her flashlight at the nearest shelf, illuminating rows of journals. She pulled one down, its leather binding cracked with age. "This is your grandfather's handwriting," she said, opening it carefully. "Listen to this. The covenant must be maintained. The harvest feeds the earth, and the earth feeds the harvest. Thomas understands now, as I understood when my father showed me. The cycle cannot be broken." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "What covenant?" Dr. Chen was examining the stone table, running her fingers along grooves carved into its surface. "Marcus, I need you to prepare yourself for what I'm about to tell you. The plants in your fields, they're not just unusual, they're impossible. Carbon dating of similar specimens shows cellular structures that predate known plant evolution by millions of years. That's impossible. Exactly, unless they were never meant to grow in our world." She turned to face him, her expression grave. "The energy readings, the electromagnetic disturbances, the way they seem to exist in quantum superposition. These plants are windows, Marcus, doorways between dimensions, and they require a very specific type of nourishment to maintain their connection." Sarah dropped the journal, pages scattering across the stone floor. Oh God, the missing people, the Hendricks family, they weren't just killed, they were sacrificed. The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Marcus staggered backward, his mind reeling. "No, my father wasn't a murderer. He couldn't have—" "Your father was a guardian," Dr. Chen said gently, "as was your grandfather, and his father before him. The covenant isn't about worship or evil, it's about balance. These plants exist at the intersection of worlds, and they require life force to maintain that balance. Without it, the barrier between dimensions begins to weaken." "And if the barrier fails completely?" Sarah asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Then things from the other side start coming through. Things that would make the plants seem benign by comparison." Marcus sank onto a stone bench, his legs unable to support him. "The strangers who came to the house, they knew about this." "Multiple groups," Dr. Chen confirmed. "Some want to exploit the dimensional gateway. Others want to destroy it entirely. Neither understands the delicate balance your family has maintained for generations." Sarah picked up another journal, this one newer. "This is your father's final entry, dated 3 days before he died." She read aloud. "The burden is too great. I cannot ask Thomas to continue what I could barely endure. Perhaps it's time to let the old ways die with me. God forgive me for what I've done and what I've failed to do." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. His father's increasingly erratic behavior in his final years, the way he'd pushed Marcus to stay away from the farm, the desperation in his last phone call, begging Marcus to sell the land to developers. "He was trying to break the cycle," Marcus whispered. "But the plants, they're still growing. How is that possible without—" A sound echoed from the stairway above, footsteps, deliberate and numerous. Dr. Chen grabbed her equipment while Sarah stuffed the journals into her bag. "The covenant finds a way," Dr. Chen said grimly, "with or without willing guardians." The footsteps grew closer, and Marcus realized with growing horror that his return to the farm hadn't been coincidence. He'd been drawn back, called by forces he was only beginning to understand. The choice his father had tried to spare him from was no longer avoidable. The harvest demanded its due, and the inheritors had finally come home. The underground chamber stretched further than Marcus had imagined, its walls lined with metal shelving units that disappeared into the darkness beyond their flashlight beams. Dr. Sarah Chen moved methodically through the space, her scientific training evident in how she catalogued each discovery with quiet precision. "These records go back 60 years, she whispered, pulling a leather-bound journal from one of the shelves. "Your grandfather was documenting everything." Marcus felt his world tilt as Sarah read aloud from the pages. His grandfather hadn't been a simple farmer. He'd been a botanist, recruited by a government program in the 1960s to develop what they called adaptive agriculture. The goal had been noble enough: create crops that could survive in harsh conditions, feed growing populations, end world hunger. But something had gone wrong. The plants began exhibiting properties we hadn't anticipated. Sarah continued reading. Growth rates beyond anything in nature. Cellular regeneration that defies current scientific understanding. Most disturbing of all, they seem to respond to human proximity, almost as if they're aware of our presence. They found her standing before a wall covered in photographs, newspaper clippings, and what looked like surveillance reports. The images showed the farm over decades, but also other locations, laboratories, government facilities, even what appeared to be military installations. "Your family wasn't just growing these plants," Elena said, her voice tight with realization. "They were protecting them. Look at this." She pointed to a series of documents bearing official government seals. Marcus recognized his father's signature on several of them, but the words made no sense. Termination orders, containment protocols, elimination directives. "The government wanted to destroy everything," he said, the pieces finally clicking into place. "My father was supposed to burn the fields, salt the earth, make sure nothing could ever grow here again. But he couldn't do it," Sarah added, finding another journal entry. "Listen to this. Today they ordered me to kill my father's life's work. 60 years of research, of hope for feeding the world, and they want it destroyed because they're afraid of what they don't understand. I told them I complied, but I've hidden samples in the old root cellar. God forgive me, but I can't let this knowledge die." The sound of footsteps echoing from the tunnel entrance made them all freeze. Marcus grabbed Elena's arm, pulling her behind one of the shelving units as heavy boots descended the ladder. The beam of a powerful flashlight swept across the chamber, far brighter than their own small lights. "They're down here," a gruff voice called up to someone above. "Spread out, check everything." Marcus recognized the voice. It was Harrison, the man who'd been watching the farm. But there were others with him now, at least 3 more sets of footsteps moving through the chamber with military precision. Elena pressed something cold and metal into Marcus's hand. A pistol. Her eyes met his in the dim light, and he saw a hardness there he'd never noticed before, a capability that spoke of training far beyond what any insurance investigator would need. "When I give the signal," she whispered so quietly he could barely hear, "you and Sarah head for that passage in the back wall. There's another way out. What about you? I'll buy you time. Go through the passage, follow it north until you reach the old grain silo. There's a truck hidden there." Before Marcus could protest, Elena was moving, using the shelving units as cover as she worked her way toward the intruders. The first gunshot made Marcus's ears ring in the confined space, but Sarah was already pulling him toward the dark opening Elena had indicated. They crawled through what felt like an endless tunnel, the sound of gunfire growing muffled behind them. Sarah's breathing was ragged with fear, but she kept moving, her flashlight creating a small circle of visibility in the suffocating darkness. "How did Elena know about the truck?" Sarah gasped as they finally emerged into the basement of the old grain silo. Marcus was wondering the same thing. Elena had known too much, moved too confidently, been too prepared for violence. The woman he'd been falling for was either remarkably resourceful or remarkably deceptive. The truck was exactly where she'd said it would be, keys in the ignition. As Marcus started the engine, he saw lights moving through the fields toward them. More vehicles, more people hunting them in the darkness. "We can't leave Elena," he said. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew they had no choice. The sound of engines growing closer made the decision for them. As they drove away from the farm, Marcus realized that everything he thought he knew about his family, about Elena, about his own life, had been carefully constructed lies. The question now wasn't just what his family had buried in the soil, It was who was willing to kill to keep those secrets buried, and why Elena seemed to know so much about both sides of this deadly game. The metallic taste of fear coated Marcus's mouth as he crouched behind the rusted combine harvester, listening to footsteps circle the barn. 3 sets, maybe 4, professional, deliberate. These weren't the same bumbling locals who'd been watching him for weeks. Sarah's breathing was shallow beside him, her fingers white-knuckled around the sample case containing the crystalline fragments they'd extracted from the deepest part of the field. The very fragments that had cost Dr. Elena Vasquez her life just hours ago. "We know you're in there," a voice called out, smooth and authoritative. "Mr. Chen, we simply want to talk." Marcus recognized the voice. Agent Morrison from the supposed EPA team that had arrived yesterday. Except EPA agents didn't typically carry automatic weapons or coordinate midnight raids. "Like you talked to Dr. Vasquez?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. The memory of finding Elena's body in her hotel room still burned in Marcus's mind. Made to look like a heart attack, but he'd seen the tiny puncture wound behind her ear. Just like his father had taught him to look for when putting down sick livestock. Quick, clean, minimal evidence. His father. Even now, with killers closing in, Marcus couldn't escape the growing certainty that Thomas Chen had known this day would come. The hidden journal they'd found in the house's foundation had been deliberately placed, deliberately preserved, a roadmap for someone who knew how to read between the lines. "The convergence accelerates," one entry had read. "The barrier weakens with each cycle. God help whoever finds this place after I'm gone." Now Marcus understood what his father had been protecting him from by driving him away 20 years ago. The crystalline structures weren't just growing, they were spreading. Each sample Elena had analyzed showed exponential cellular replication, unlike anything in terrestrial biology. The footsteps had stopped. The silence stretched like a held breath. Movement, north side. A different voice crackled through radio static. Marcus pressed deeper into the shadows, pulling Sarah with him toward the barn's back wall where loose boards offered their only escape route. But as they moved, his boot caught a scattered pile of tools. The clatter echoed through the cavernous space like a gunshot. Flashlight beams swept through the darkness, and suddenly the night exploded with activity. Go, go, go. Marcus shoved Sarah through the gap in the boards just as the barn's main doors burst inward. Muzzle flashes strobed through the darkness, wood splinters erupting around them as they tumbled into the cornfield beyond. They ran through the maze of withered stalks, the crystalline contamination having transformed the familiar crop into something alien and brittle. Behind them, shouts and radio chatter indicated a coordinated pursuit. These people had resources, organization. This wasn't random, it was a cleanup operation. "The old storm cellar," Sarah gasped, pointing toward a barely visible mound near the property's eastern edge. Elena mentioned underground readings in that sector. They stumbled through the mutated corn, the plants crackling like glass wind chimes in their wake. Marcus's lungs burned, but terror drove him forward. Whatever his family had discovered or unleashed in this soil, powerful people wanted it contained. The storm cellar's door was nearly hidden beneath 20 years of overgrowth, but Marcus's childhood memories guided his hands to the rusted handle. It groaned open, revealing wooden steps descending into absolute darkness. They plunged downward just as flashlight beams swept across the field above. The cellar was larger than Marcus remembered, extending far beyond what should have been possible under the original foundation. And it wasn't empty. Sarah's phone flashlight revealed walls lined with his father's research. Decades of meticulous documentation, charts tracking growth patterns, and photographs showing the crystalline formation's evolution from tiny seedlings to the massive structures now dominating the northern field. But it was the final wall that made Marcus's blood freeze. Maps, dozens of them, marking locations across 3 continents. Each marked site had a date and a status notation. Beijing contained 1987, Siberia contained 1993, Nevada, active, Romania, active, and now, in red ink that looked disturbingly fresh, Iowa, compromise imminent. "My God," Sarah breathed, reading over his shoulder. "This isn't the only site. Your father was part of some kind of global monitoring network." A loose floorboard creaked behind them. They spun to find Agent Morrison descending the steps, weapon drawn but not yet aimed. His expression held something Marcus hadn't expected: respect, tinged with genuine regret. "Your father was a good man, Mr. Chen, one of our best field researchers. But he broke protocol when he tried to warn you 20 years ago." Morrison's voice carried the weight of difficult decisions. "We hoped you'd stay away. We really did." "What is it?" Marcus demanded. "What did he find?" Morrison glanced at the maps, then back at Marcus with something that might have been pity. "Proof that we're not alone, Mr. Chen, and evidence that they're coming home." The barn's ancient timbers groaned as Marcus pressed his back against the rough wood, his heart hammering against his ribs. Through the gaps between the weathered boards, he could see the dark figures moving methodically across the moonlit fields, their flashlight beams cutting through the night like searchlights hunting prey. Sarah's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers ice-cold despite the humid summer air. "How many?" she whispered, her breath barely audible. Marcus counted the light sweeping back and forth across his father's corrupted crop. 6. Maybe 7. He squeezed her hand, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. "They're checking the perimeter first." The plants seemed to sense the intruders. Even from their hiding spot 50 yards away, Marcus could see the unnatural shimmer that ran through the stalks like electricity through water. The air itself felt charged, pregnant with the same wrongness that had been building since he'd first set foot on this cursed ground 3 days ago. 3 days. Had it really been so little time since he'd driven up that familiar dirt road, thinking his biggest problem was deciding whether to sell the farm or let it rot? Now he understood why his father had drunk himself to death, why his mother had fled to the city and never looked back, why the townspeople crossed themselves when they mentioned the Holloway name. A beam of light swept dangerously close to the barn, and Marcus pulled Sarah deeper into the shadows. The musty smell of old hay and rusted equipment filled his nostrils, mingled with something else. Something sweet and cloying that made his stomach turn. The same smell that clung to everything the plants touched. "Marcus!" Sarah's voice was barely a thread of sound. "Look!" He followed her gaze to the far end of the barn, where a section of floorboards had been pulled away. In the pale moonlight filtering through the broken roof, he could see the dark opening that led down into the earth. The cellar he'd played in as a child, before his father had boarded it up and forbidden him from ever going down there again. Before he could stop her, Sarah was moving toward the opening, her footsteps silent on the barn floor. Marcus wanted to call out, to pull her back, but the sound of voices outside froze him in place. "Spreading faster than we calculated." The voice belonged to Dr. Reeves, the agricultural specialist who'd been asking too many questions around town. "The root system has expanded almost a full acre since last week." "Then we accelerate the timeline." This voice was unfamiliar, crisp with authority and completely without warmth. "No more waiting. We harvest tonight and burn the rest." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. Whatever they were planning, it couldn't happen. Not when he was finally beginning to understand what his father had been protecting all these years. The plants weren't just some bizarre mutation or government experiment gone wrong. They were something far older, far more dangerous, and far more valuable. Sarah had reached the cellar opening and was gesturing frantically for him to follow. The voices outside were moving closer, their flashlight beams now probing the barn's exterior walls. In moments, they would discover the unlocked door. Marcus made his choice. He crossed the barn in 3 quick strides and dropped through the opening into the cellar below. Sarah followed, pulling the loose floorboards back into place above their heads just as the barn door creaked open. The cellar was exactly as he remembered it. Narrow stone walls, slick with moisture, the smell of earth and decay, and something else. Something that made his childhood nightmares come flooding back. But now there was light where there had been none before, a soft phosphorescent glow emanating from the far wall. Sarah grabbed his arm as footsteps thundered overhead. "Marcus, what is this place?" He stared at the wall, at the intricate patterns carved into the stone that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Symbols that hurt to look at directly, that made his vision blur and his head pound. He'd seen them before, in his father's notebook, in the margins of newspaper clippings about strange crop failures and unexplained illnesses. "My father didn't plant those things," he whispered, the truth hitting him like a physical blow. He was trying to contain them. The footsteps above had stopped moving. In the sudden silence, Marcus could hear something else, a sound like whispers carried on wind, though the air in the cellar was perfectly still. The carvings on the wall seemed to shift and writhe in his peripheral vision, and he understood with terrible clarity that whatever had been sleeping beneath his family's land was finally waking up. Sarah's grip on his arm tightened. "We have to get out of here." But as the first drops of something warm and viscous began to seep through the floorboards above them, Marcus realized they might already be too late. The laboratory beneath the farmhouse hummed with an energy that made Marcus's teeth ache. Dr. Elena Vasquez moved between the containment units with practiced efficiency, her fingers dancing across holographic displays that materialized from thin air. Each gesture revealed another impossible truth about what his father had been growing in those fields. "The synthesis began in 1953, Elena explained, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Your grandfather was part of a classified agricultural program. They thought they were developing enhanced crop yields to feed a growing population. They had no idea what they were actually creating." Marcus stared at the pulsing, translucent pods lining the walls. Inside each one, something that looked disturbingly organic writhed in a luminescent fluid. The specimens bore no resemblance to any plant he'd ever seen, yet they moved with an intelligence that made his skin crawl. "These aren't plants at all, are they?" he whispered. Elena's laugh was bitter. Plants, animals, minerals, those categories become meaningless when you're dealing with matter that exists partially outside our dimensional framework. Your father spent 40 years trying to understand what your grandfather had unleashed. By the time I joined the project 15 years ago, we knew we were dealing with something that could rewrite the fundamental laws of biology. The sound of footsteps echoed from the stairwell above. Elena's eyes widened with fear as she grabbed Marcus's arm. "They found us! We need to get you out of here!" "What about all this?" Marcus gestured at the laboratory. "The evidence means nothing if you're dead." Elena's fingers flew across a central console. "I'm initiating the purge protocol. Everything will be destroyed, but the backup data is already uploaded to a secure server. Dr. Sarah Chen has been expecting this day." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. "Chen? The agricultural scientist from the university? She's been calling me for weeks. Because she knows what's coming next. The entities in those fields aren't just growing, they're preparing. Your father discovered they were developing some kind of collective consciousness, and the organization that's been hunting you believes they can harness that intelligence for their own purposes." Red warning lights began flashing throughout the laboratory. The mechanical hum rose to a whine that seemed to vibrate through Marcus's bones. Above them, he could hear voices shouting, footsteps moving with military precision. "There's a tunnel," Elena said, leading him toward what appeared to be a solid wall. Her palm pressed against a hidden scanner, and a section of concrete slid away to reveal a narrow passage. "It leads to the old grain silo. From there, You can reach the woods without being seen. Marcus hesitated at the threshold. Come with me. Elena shook her head, her dark eyes reflecting the crimson emergency lights. Someone needs to ensure the purge completes properly. If even one specimen survives, they'll rebuild everything within months. Your father made me promise that if this day came, I would choose the greater good over personal survival. The laboratory shuddered as explosions echoed from somewhere above. Dust rained from the ceiling, and several of the containment units began emitting high-pitched alarms. The entities in the field, Marcus said urgently. How do I stop them? You can't. Not alone. Elena pressed a data drive into his hand. But Chen has been developing a counteragent. The formula is on there, along with everything your father documented about their behavior patterns. The key is in the soil composition. Your grandfather didn't just plant alien organisms, he changed the fundamental structure of the earth itself. Heavy footsteps thundered down the stairwell. Elena shoved Marcus into the tunnel just as the laboratory door exploded inward. Through the settling debris, Marcus caught a glimpse of armed figures in tactical gear, their faces hidden behind reflective visors. Find Holloway, a voice commanded. Vasquez is expendable, but we need him alive. Marcus crawled through the cramped tunnel, Elena's words echoing in his mind. Behind him, he heard muffled gunshots, then a deep rumble that seemed to come from the earth itself. The tunnel shook violently, and chunks of concrete began raining down around him. He emerged, gasping, into the grain silo, just as a series of massive explosions rocked the farmhouse. Through the grimy windows, he watched flames shoot skyward, carrying with them the secrets of 3 generations. But the data drive in his pocket felt heavy with possibility and terror in equal measure. In the distance, beyond the burning wreckage of his childhood home, the fields continued their impossible growth. The organisms swayed in patterns that defied the wind direction, their movements synchronized like neurons firing in some vast alien brain. Whatever his grandfather had planted was nearly ready to harvest itself, and Marcus was the only one left who might be able to stop it. He pulled out his phone with trembling fingers and dialed the number that had been calling him for weeks. Dr. Sarah Chen answered on the first ring. Marcus? Thank God. Are you safe? No, he said, watching his past burn. But I'm ready to learn the truth. The crystalline structures pulsed with an otherworldly light as Marcus stood at the edge of what had once been his father's cornfield. Behind him, Dr. Sarah Chen's breathing was labored, blood seeping through the makeshift bandage on her shoulder where Novak's bullet had grazed her. The corporate mercenary lay unconscious 20 feet away, brought down by Marcus's desperate tackle when the man had tried to destroy the crystal formation with explosives. Your father knew this day would come, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the humming emanating from the crystals. He left detailed instructions. Everything we need to know is in his final journal. Marcus clutched the leather-bound book they'd retrieved from the hidden compartment beneath the old barn. His hands trembled as he opened to the last entry, dated just 3 days before his father's supposed heart attack. Deetha visitors came again last night. They're not from our world, but they're not invaders either. They're refugees. Their planet died from the same poison we're creating here. Greed, destruction, the slow murder of everything that sustains life. The crystals aren't just growing. They're thinking, feeling, mourning their lost home while trying to save ours. Marcus looked up at the towering formations that had sprouted from soil he'd once helped till. Each crystal face reflected not just light, but images, glimpses of dying worlds, of civilizations that had failed to heed the warnings their own planets had given them. The pharmaceutical companies, the government contractors, they all want to weaponize this, Sarah continued, struggling to her feet. They see alien technology and think only of profit and power. But your father understood the truth. Another page revealed his father's shaking handwriting. Marcus left because he thought I was weak, that I'd given up. But I was preparing. The crystals chose our farm because our family has always understood the language of growing things. They need a guardian, someone who can protect them until humanity is ready to accept their gift. The sound of approaching helicopters cut through the morning air. Marcus spotted the black aircraft on the horizon, 3 of them, moving fast and low. Sarah grabbed his arm with her uninjured hand. "They'll destroy everything," she said. "Novak was just the advance team. Those helicopters carry enough firepower to turn this entire area into a crater." Marcus stared at the journal, at his father's final words. "If I fail, if they come before the crystals are strong enough to protect themselves, Marcus must choose. He can run again, or he can finally understand what it means to tend something greater than himself." The helicopters were close enough now that Marcus could see the weapons mounted beneath them. He thought of his life in the city, his successful business, his comfortable existence built on the foundation of abandoning this place and everything it represented. Then he looked at the crystals, at the images of hope and renewal flickering within their faceted surfaces. "What do I need to do?" he asked Sarah. She pointed to the largest crystal formation at the center of the field. "Your father discovered that the crystals respond to human consciousness, to genuine intent. They've been waiting for someone from your family to make contact, but it's dangerous. The neural link could overwhelm your mind." Marcus was already walking toward the crystal. Behind him, Sarah called out warnings about the risks, about the soldiers in the helicopters who would shoot first and ask questions later. But for the first time in 20 years, Marcus felt like he was exactly where he belonged. He placed his palms against the smooth surface of the central crystal. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. His consciousness expanded beyond his body, beyond the farm, beyond Earth itself. He saw the visitors' dying world, felt their desperate hope, understood their mission. They weren't conquerors but gardeners, trying to plant seeds of wisdom before it was too late. The helicopters opened fire, but their bullets struck an invisible barrier 50 feet from the crystal field. Marcus, still connected to the alien consciousness, felt the crystal's defensive systems awakening. More formations burst from the soil across the countryside, not just on his family's land, but on farms throughout the region. Each new crystal sang with the same frequency, creating a network of protection and communication. Through the neural link, Marcus broadcast a message that every human within 100 miles could hear, could feel in their bones. "We are not your enemies. We are your future, if you choose to accept it." The helicopters retreated as more crystals emerged, their pilots reporting equipment failures and system malfunctions that made approach impossible. Marcus slowly withdrew his hands from the crystal, his father's journal falling open beside him to a page he hadn't seen before, a note written in his own childish handwriting from 30 years ago. "Want to help Dad grow things that matter." Sarah stood beside him, her wound forgotten, watching as the morning sun painted the crystal field in colors that had no earthly names. "What happens now?" she asked. Marcus smiled, finally understanding his father's legacy. "Now we learn to listen."